Is it just me, or does today feel like a glorious day to commit to a massive project that's going to take me the next 1.5 years of my life? It is time. The first piece being completed and lovely, I now get to move on to the thing that I couldn't wait to do before I even started doing this one, which is the next one. If you've seen any of the videos for my previous Beauty and the Beast stained glass embroidery project, or you've, been around on my Instagram, then you may have heard me mention that that's not the only one I want to do. There's more. I would very much like to make every single stained glass from the beginning of that movie. You know it, you love it. The whole story at the top of Disney's animated Beauty and the Beast is told through stained glass windows, and they're beautiful. I remember even as a kid thinking that they were so beautiful, and that was such a creative and unique way to tell the backstory of this fairy tale. They were done by an artist named Mac George, who apparently still works for Disney because he recently shared on his Facebook page renderings that he had done for Bruno's room in Encanto. He has worked on so many Disney movies. His career is incredible, his artwork is incredible, and I think the crowning, shining moment of it all, for me at least, is these stained glass windows from Beauty and the Beast. What really makes the stained glass windows stand out to me nowadays is that they are absolutely perfect for my style of embroidery. I am not personally a great thread painter. I'm not great at realistic portraits done with embroidery. There are a great many incredible embroidery artists who are able to do those things, and for a while I thought maybe that's something I should be pushing myself to learn. But honestly, it's not really the skill with the needle that I'm lacking there. It's the same problem that I ran into when I tried to get better at drawing and when I took drawing classes. I have trouble seeing things the proper way for somebody who is then going to replicate those things in a realistic fashion. I don't notice shading and depth and lighting. Of course, this is something I could still get better at if I applied myself and practiced consistently, but it's not honestly super high on my list. I like the skills that I'm currently developing, and I like the direction that my embroidery currently goes. So when I see something like these stained glass windows, it's absolute perfection for me. It is bright colors and intricate detail, but it's all 2D, and getting to do it with satin stitch and backstitch exclusively means that I can focus on making those stitches absolutely perfect, very pristine and smooth and glossy. I can focus on the colors and the angles of the stitches and how the light reflects off of those things. And that's why these stained glass windows just stand out to me so much as absolute inspiration for embroidery. And this is why I must do them all. Of course, that is a very tall order, so we are going to take this one step at a time, and step one was the final stained glass window that you don't see until the end of the movie, and it's done. This one embroidery piece has set off something that honestly might keep me busy for the next decade, but it's at least going to keep me busy for the next year or more as I work on the next piece. I've actually wanted to do this piece for so long, even before I stitched the very first version of my Beauty and the Beast piece back in the day. But at that point, it just seemed straight up impossible. It was too big, it was too intricate. There was no way I would be able to stitch that, especially because I was still thinking very much on the scale of the first piece that I stitched, which only stood about yay tall. And stitching it so much smaller actually made it a lot harder because of all those details. They get really hard to stitch when they're freaking tiny like this. It's easier actually to stitch this piece bigger. And the same goes for this giant castle landscape. It's actually going to be much easier, or just possible in the first place, for me to stitch it bigger. My goal is that all of these pieces, however many I end up doing, it might just be these two, but I want them all to go together. I want them to be on the same kind of fabric, I want them to be framed the same way, and I want all of the sizes and colors to relate to each other. This one is a much longer piece, so in order for it to relate to this one and also compete with this one for central focus, because I think this one and that one are the two main embroideries, it needs to be at least as tall as this one, which is 15 inches. Of course, if it's 15 inches tall, that means it's pretty darn long and big in general. And the biggest frame that I had barely fit this last piece that I did. So there was a first step to starting this castle embroidery. I'm sure that video has already come out. I'll link it. I can never remember which side it's on. And that was building a frame, a custom frame for myself that could hold the proper size of fabric for this piece. That's all done. It's over here. Now we're getting into the actual piece. We're getting into the pattern, the tracing of it, the colors, all the good stuff, the really good, interesting part of the process, because after this, you just stitch for months on end. So the first thing I did here was try to find a coloring page version of this image. That's how I stitched the original one. I just looked for coloring pages. Now I found several outline versions of this castle piece, and I was kind of choosing between them on like which one I could blow up and still had the best detail to it. But then I put on a screenshot that I had taken of the actual image from the movie, and then I tried to line up this outline on top of it, and it wasn't fitting right. No matter which sides I kind of shrunk and shifted around, it was always either like a little too stretched or a little too crammed together, and it wasn't lining up with the original image much, which I was kind of okay with. But then I started looking closer and I noticed that some of the details weren't even the same. One specific thing I noticed was this little piece of the castle coming out the side looked very different in the line drawing than it did in the original image. So having seen that, I kind of decided that there was only one route for me to take, doing it myself. So I already started this process last night, and I already spent several hours on it, and I'm not even half done. But I think that this is going to be the best option for getting an absolutely correct line image from the original drawing itself. And weirdly enough, I'm really enjoying doing this. I remember considering this option on the original, the first stained glass thing. I remember thinking like, oh, I could go through and draw all the lines over it myself, and then immediately scrapping that idea because it seemed way too hard. And now I'm like, this isn't that hard. Time consuming, yes, but not that hard. And I'm even doing it in Photoshop because I cannot yet be bothered to learn Illustrator. I know I really need to learn Illustrator. It's one of those things that I'm just always like, I don't have time. I'm too busy doing other stuff. But the reality is probably that like, I just don't want to learn yet another program. So that's where I am right now. Consider this project officially started. I need some like big scissors to cut through a ribbon or something. This one's gonna be a long boy. Ooh, I don't like that. That sounded inappropriate. I'm probably gonna split it up into another 2 to 3 to maybe 4 videos just so that I can keep you guys updated and show you the progress. But as with the last one, if you really want to keep up to date on where I am in this project, it's best to just check out my Instagram. I usually share my progress in my stories, sometimes daily, sometimes weekly. I am not consistent on Instagram. For now, let's go back to Photoshop because I've got probably another 8 hours of making lines before we move on. Well, it took me 12 hours, but it is done. That was so much clicking. Once I got to the little farmhouse region and then the castle itself with all of those roofs, with all of the little shingles, it was a lot. But I am very glad I stuck with it because this is far more detailed and far more correct to the original image than any of the images that I found like done in this line style already online. And I like adding the little touch that I did it myself. A little extra bespokeness. I don't understand the word bespoke. It's kind of weird to me. So now that I have the pattern, basically, yeah, this is the pattern done, I need to figure out the exact size that I'm gonna make this. Obviously, my fabric is already framed. I made the frame based off of about how big I figured I'd be making this piece, but I haven't yet really nailed down the exact size that I want it. The first piece is 15 inches tall, so this one needs to be at least 15 inches tall. I'd like to make it just like a little bit taller than that if I could. And then the length should take care of itself because I'm not gonna squish it or anything. And then I can stack 2 pieces of paper all the way down, probably 6 pieces of paper total to break up this pattern and get it printed out so I can trace it on. I'm gonna give that a try now and see how it goes. On the original pattern, I'll add some guidelines to kind of block out that 6 sections and see if the ratio looks right just before I commit to this. And then I can insert the saved JPEG onto this new page and blow it up until I'm only seeing what's inside one section that I've blocked out on the original pattern. There is probably a much more precise way to do this, a much better way to do this, but y'all, I work with the knowledge I've got, and this is what it is. Feel free to tell me in the comments if there is a better way to do this. It'll be too late, but you know, I'll put that knowledge to use the next time I have to do something like this. Once I've done that 6 times, so I have all 6 sections, then I can start printing it out. So, pardon my language, but holy So, as I've mentioned before, my sense of like size and spatial awareness, I guess it isn't the greatest. In my head, I knew that like, oh, this is gonna be a big piece. But a similar thing happened with the last one. I kept being like, ugh, but it's not gonna be big enough. Up until I printed out the pattern, and then I was like, oh no, this is real big. So yeah, that's what just happened right now. That's 1/6 of it. Look how freaking big the sun is. Like, what the crap am I supposed to do with that? But the thing is, despite this and some other sections like the clouds being absolutely huge, the pattern itself kind of needs to be this big. I really wouldn't want to stitch it any smaller because, yeah, that's the biggest one, but the smallest stuff is real small. Look at those shingles. Like, there are tiny details on this entire thing. If I had done this pattern any smaller than this, I really wouldn't have been able to get those tiny details in there. As it is, it's not going to be easy to get those tiny details in there. This gives me something else I have to think about. Should I abandon satin stitch in some cases, in some places? These giant areas are not exactly things you want to satin stitch. I generally recommend over and over again to never do satin stitch on an area that is more than 2 inches long at its longest point. This sun is, let me just whip out my ruler. It's 2.5, so it's not that much longer, but even 2 inches long for satin stitch is like pushing it. So the debate now is, should I maybe do some split stitch? It's not something I thought I would run into. I thought I would be able to do this entire series of stained glass windows completely out of satin stitch with backstitch outlines so that they all like perfectly match and go together and everything is grand and la-di-da. But now I am having to question that theory. Okay, while I think about that, let me get these laid out so you can see how big this thing is gonna be overall. Let's do the puzzle. All right, so as you can see here and here, I have managed to get this ever so slightly taller, which means I'm guessing this is actually gonna come to around 16.5 inches tall. Let's test that. Oh, we are so close to 17. All right, so I did a little bit larger than I meant to, and I'm okay with that. And there we go. Good Lord, look at those details. 29.5 inches long. But as you can see here, we have the few satin stitch problem areas. First up, the borders here. Then we have the sun, big, clouds, quite big, and these rocks down here, also quite big. So my other option besides satin stitch would basically be a split stitch fill, which looks great as a fill stitch as well, it just looks different. It has texture throughout the whole thing instead of this smooth glossy finish. And here's the thing, if it was just like, say the clouds that were too big and everything else was perfectly fine, it would look really weird to use one different stitch on this one area. However, the areas that need it are very nicely spread around the piece. Here, 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 here. They're all towards the edges, and they kind of create a triangle in the center. So I think actually putting split stitch in there wouldn't look necessarily so strange. It would be noticeable that it's a different stitch, but because it's balanced by the other ones that are also a different stitch, it wouldn't necessarily be like, oh my god, why is that one thing different? Who did this? Who made this choice? They're terrible. Luckily, this is not a decision that I have to make immediately because the first thing that I'm going to be doing is tracing this on here, obviously. And then after that, I'll be stitching the entire outlines. So getting to the fill stitches will not be for quite a while now, like it could be weeks, it could be a month, who even knows. So I'm not gonna worry about it right now. I am going to probably ask a lot of people's opinions on Instagram because that's what we do. So my next step is going to be trimming all of these pieces of paper down and then taping them together into one solid sheet of paper because the last thing that I want is for stuff to slide around and not be perfectly lined up. Not about that. I'll also probably go ahead and draw a thick border line around the whole thing. This one of course doesn't have that border line when you see it because it just fills the entire screen, but I am definitely adding it. Well, that turned out to be an all-day affair. It's not that it actually took me all that long to trace it on. I was estimating that it would take me 4 hours. And as it turns out, I came in right over 3 hours. So not too bad. But the reason that it took all day long is because I could only trace this by like standing up and bending over it, and that hurt so much. I think I started with like 30 minutes of tracing and then took a break, did stretches, and then I came back and did some more. But like every time I came back to do more, I was doing a smaller amount until I was only doing like 8 or 9 minutes before my back was killing me. Maybe it's just the result of me having stared at it for a while now, but I'm not finding it nearly as daunting in the traced form as I did in the pattern form. Trick of the mind, probably? I mean, who am I kidding? This thing is frickin' ridiculous. Hi. I'm really excited for when color starts going on it, but I can't let my mind drift too far in that direction because, of course, I have to stitch all of the outlines first. I'm kind of assuming it'll be like a month before I actually get to the color. In case you can't tell, I really enjoy like guessing at how long things are gonna take, how much of something there's gonna be. So I'm also really interested to find out how many colors will end up being on this piece, because that one ended up having 89. How many are gonna go on here? Is it technically going to be more? Just because it's bigger doesn't necessarily mean that there's more color on it. Yeah, I don't know. This is just how I amuse myself. How many colors will there be? How long will it take me to stitch the outlines? How long will it take me to stitch the whole thing? I'm gonna make some guesses now, and then, you know, a year from now or more, we'll find out if I was right. I'm gonna guess between 110 and 120 colors. I think it will take me about 100 hours to stitch the outlines. And I think the entire piece will take me 1,000 hours. Well, dang. Yeah, okay, those are my guesses. We'll see how close I get. And with that, we're going to wrap it up on this section. And as I've mentioned before, if you'd like to stay up to date on my progress on this piece, especially once I start actually stitching it, and that's gonna be a big break between videos there, you can always go follow along on my Instagram account, where I will post far more frequent updates, as well as like all my little bitty victories every time a tiny section gets filled in. That all goes on my stories. All right, and I'm gonna go because if I stare at this any longer, I will get out a needle and start stitching it right now. And I have other things I'm supposed to be doing right now, so not allowed.